I'm going to go with the assumption that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest of the Gospels, meaning that the Gospel of Mark was written first, before Matthew, before Luke, before John. Okay, but I've listened to many people, including some believers, who claims that the book of Mark does not portray Jesus as God, which I think they are fundamentally incorrect. In fact, I would argue that the book of Mark portrayed a more divine Jesus than many of the Gospels we have ever read about. And so, in this video, I'm going to be showing you that Mark calls Jesus God in every chapter. So let's get started. When you check the book of Mark chapter 1 and verse 3, I'm going to be reading for you. The Bible says that the voice of the one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. This is a prophecy from the book of Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3, which is being fulfilled by John the Baptist. He is preparing the way for Jesus Christ. And the Jesus in this context was referred to as the Lord, which is Yahweh, Kurios, the Lord, Yahweh. And who is Yahweh? Jesus. So who is Jesus? God. Alright, so in the book of Mark chapter 2, no one forgives sins but God. And we can see in the book of Mark chapter 2 that Jesus forgives sins. He proved this to everybody who sees him and to everybody who will ever read about him, that he has the authority to forgive sins. No one in history has ever done that, not even in the book of Old Testament. The prophets never announced over people by their own authority that their sins are forgiven. But Jesus, we saw Jesus doing this expressly. No one can do this, him demonstrating his authority as God. In the book of Mark chapter 3, we can see Jesus demonstrating a divine authority by casting out demons, which no one has ever done by their own authority. And so Jesus demonstrating his power as God, the creator of even the demonic spirits, has the authority to cast out demons. No one could ever do that without the permission of God. But you will see that Jesus will never cast out demons by calling on God first. He do it as at will. Sometimes even the demons would not wait for him before they rush out of anybody that Jesus is about to, do the deliverance ministration for. In the book of Mark chapter 4, we saw something very extraordinary. Jesus calms the storm. And there is something I want to show you in the book of Psalms. The Bible says in the book of Psalms chapter 107 from verse 28 to 29, the Bible says, when people cry out to God in the midst of the storm, it is Yahweh who calms the storm. So when Jesus by his authority speaks to storm and the storm listens to him, they didn't listen to Jesus just because he is a prophet. The storm listens to Jesus because Jesus is the creator of all things. So the storm could recognize his voice and they were still. The Bible here says that it is Yahweh who calms the storm. So no one else can ever calm a storm except Yahweh himself, meaning that Jesus is Yahweh. In the book of Mark chapter 5, when Jesus raised the dead, when you go to study the Old Testament of the prophets who raised the dead, you would realize that many of those prophets, they were able to raise the dead crying out to Yahweh. They cried out to God, and God, who is the resurrection and the life, will give life to that dead man or dead woman for them to come back to life. But when you see anytime Jesus raises the dead, he does not pray to God in heaven. He simply touches them and tells them to come back to life, or he merely just calls their name, and you see this strange manifestation of the power of God being activated instantly. Jesus never struggles to wake the dead. The only time we saw Jesus with a loud shout crying for a dead man to come alive was the time of Lazarus who has died for 4 days, and Jesus had to cry. And the reason why Jesus cried was because the death of Lazarus was painful to him. So Jesus had the authority. He has the authority to raise the dead back to life by his authority, simply because he is God. In the book of Mark chapter 6, we can see that Jesus walks on water. I want to show you something in the book of Job chapter 9 and verse 8. The Bible says it is God alone that stretches out the heaven and walks on the waves of the sea. It is God alone. So when you see Jesus walking upon the water, which no one has ever done, it is simply because he is God. In the book of Mark chapter 7, we can see Jesus healing the blind, healing the deaf, and even those that were mute, healing them and giving them healings instantly. Let's see what the Bible says in the book of Exodus chapter 3 and verse 11. The Bible says, "And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth, or who make the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord?" Meaning that it is God who is the sick. It is God who raised the dead. It is God who opens the blind ear and the blind eyes and the deaf and the mute. If Jesus was able to demonstrate these miracles, which is very scarce, demonstrating this powerful and magnificent miracle, it means that he was not just a mere human. He's God. I can go on and on and on and on and on to convince you that Mark was trying to portray a more divine Jesus than even some of the Gospels, like the Gospel of John. Okay, so we need to erase this mentality that the book of Mark does not portray a more divine Jesus. I hope you have been convinced that Jesus is God. Glory be to God. If this video blesses you, do it to like and write on the comment section what stood out for you, and do it to also study the other chapters. This video will not permit me, to do it chapter by chapter, but I show you every chapter in the book of Mark portray the more divine Jesus. Till the next time that we meet, I remain your host, the P. Isaac. God bless you.